It's a long way to Tipperary, it's a long way to go. It's a long way to Tipperary, to the sweetest girl I know.
1917, the Western Front. The armies of the First World War are locked into bloody trench warfare. But do the British have a weapon that might finally break the stalemate? Find out today on The Die is Cocked. Not again! Hello, I'm Bruce. Welcome to the basement. Or today, I should say, welcome to the loft. Today we're gaming at my good friend Eric's house. Now, most of us wargamers have our gaming rooms in dark and dingy basements. But Eric doesn't have a basement. Instead, he has a wonderful, sunny, airy, bright loft filled with gorgeously painted figures and magnificent scratch-built terrain. So that's what we'll be playing today. The assassination of the Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand on June 28, 1914, combined with Europe's complex web of alliances, plunged most of the world into the Great War, which is what World War I was called before there was a World War II. It pitted the central powers of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire against the Allies, France, Russia, the British Empire, Italy, and, eventually, the United States of America. After a few weeks of maneuvering by the German, British, and French armies, the war in the West bogged down, as each side built elaborate systems of trenches running from Flanders to Switzerland. The front lines did not change much for the next 4 years. Both sides sought ways to break the stalemate. Both used massive artillery bombardments to try to blast their way through the enemy lines. The Germans raised elite units of Stoßtruppen, shock troops, to lead the assaults on the Allied trenches. The British Army chose a different route to break the stalemate than the Germans. Great Britain entered the First World War after Germany invaded neutral Belgium. By 1916, their army on the Western Front consisted of 54 British and Empire divisions, a huge increase over the 7 divisions initially sent to France with the British Expeditionary Force in 1914. These men were good soldiers, but in 1916, the British Army introduced the tank, an armoured fighting vehicle designed to cross over the German trenches. Of course, these crossings did not always succeed. Our game today will be set in 1917, as the British Army deploys its Mark IV tanks in an effort to break through 3 lines of German trenches in this gorgeous trench system built by Eric. The British objective is to reach the German artillery deployed behind the 3rd line of trenches, represented by this attractive model. I realize that this is not what most people would think of when someone uses the term attractive model, but we're wargamers. The Germans today will be played by myself and Perry. Here you see us in our bunker, coming up with a cunning plan. Mwahahaha! The British will be played by Eric, Paul I, and Paul II. We find it best to have 2 Pauls in our games to add to the confusion and fog of war. Mark will be refereeing the game today. To add to the confusion, throughout the game he referred to the British as Canadians. For the benefit of any American viewers, the British monarch is Canada's head of state, and we have their picture on our money, but we're not British. The British have accents, and we don't. Of course, the British might disagree with that. The Germans are in a strong position, with 3 lines of trenches reinforced with bunkers and held by 2 companies of infantry, with machine guns, trench mortars, and an anti-tank gun, as well as an anti-tank rifle. Reinforcements are also on the way. Perry is confident that we can hold, in spite of my famously bad dice rolling. The rule set we are using today is Trench War, which is simple, fast, very deadly, and loads of fun. The battle begins with an off-table artillery barrage. The British guns remove some of the German barbed wire. Even when it deviates from its intended target, it still manages to destroy barbed wire. Additionally, one of the German trench mortars is knocked out. Though they haven't destroyed as much wire as they wanted to, the British go over the top, into the face of determined German resistance. Only Paul, on their left flank, is thought to use his tank, Achilles, to provide cover for his men. As the British advance, they receive off-table fire support from a Canadian armoured car with a machine gun. Eric's tank, Hector, reaches the first trench line, while Paul's tank, Argo, moves up to support the infantry. My anti-tank gun opens fire and ventilates Paul's tank, Achilles. However, when I make a damage roll, I roll uncharacteristically high. In this case, high is bad, and I cause only superficial damage. The Germans cannot stand in the face of the steel behemoth Eric has launched into their midst. The British take the first trench line and push on. You can see how much their numbers have been reduced, however, and there are still 2 more trench lines to go. Furthermore, although the German troops in the center have been killed or routed, there are still Germans holding on both ends of the trench. On the British right flank, Paul's tank Argo is also crossing the trench line, but Perry's Germans are fighting back. We can see here that all the British tanks have breached the first trench line. Perry has consolidated the Germans in the third line and confidently awaits the British advance. I still have men fighting on the right edge of the first trench line. They engage Achilles with grenades. Trench War is a card-based game, with a card on the deck for when grenades explode. The British and Achilles throw out my grenades, but then I throw more in. This time it works, and Achilles is immobilized for the rest of the game. Maybe I found its heel. The other Paul mops up the last German defenders in the first trench line, and his tank, Argo, pushes on to the second trench line. Eric leads the British assault with Hector. Hector has been damaged by the anti-tank gun, but keeps on coming. But oh no! Eric fails a bog check while crossing the second trench and becomes immobilized. Eric's reduced infantry break into the second German line, which is undefended. Hector gets underway again and rumbles toward the third trench line. However, it is very nearly destroyed by an errant shell from a British artillery barrage. Paul's tank Argo has been immobilized by the German anti-tank rifle, so it's all up to Hector. Hector breaks into the final German defensive line and mows down the German defenders. With the third line breached and British infantry coming up in support, the Kaiser's surviving troops throw in the towel. The battle ends in a hard-won British victory.
It never was worthwhile. So pack up your troubles in your own. Sit back and smile, smile, smile.
Today's game was a playtest for a game to be run at the Hot Lead Convention in Stratford, Ontario. So let's ask the playtesters how they think it went.
I think the scenario worked well. It's fairly balanced. There might be a couple of things that we need to change, but generally it was a forward movement that reached its objective. Comments?
Yeah, it was a good set of rules. Easy to learn, easy to play, fast. It was an enjoyable game.
Yeah, I think tactically, if there's any lessons to come out of playing this game, it's get your tanks up forward and use the trenches for cover when you can, because if you're in the open, especially infantry, you don't last very long under the various types of fire that can be brought down upon you.
Yeah, no, lots of casualties.
Yeah.
Well, this time round, the Germans were not as successful as the last game. We put our forward troops too close to their lines, and they led with tanks, which were devastating. So we lost 2 out of our 3 units very quickly. And we only slowed down the tanks by some pretty lucky and extraordinary shooting once they got past the first trench. So that didn't slow them down enough, and they managed to break through to the third line. So well done to the British for winning this particular game.
We played a war game here today, but it's well to remember that in real life, war is not a game. There are real consequences and real victims. Many of my great-uncles were gassed while serving on the Western Front in the Great War. Although they all survived, they never completely recovered. Many of you will have similar stories from your own families. Between 9 and 11 million servicemen and women were killed during the First World War. Millions of civilians also perished. Between 1914 and 1918, the German armed forces alone had over 1.7 million dead and more than 4 million wounded. During the same period, Britain and her empire raised nearly 9 million personnel for the conflict. Of those, over 900,000 gave their lives for king and country before the final victory was won. Lest we forget.
Keep the home fires burning while your hearts are yearning, though your lads are far.